Welcome back to our fourth video in our series for the statistical reporting. This one's going to all be about Table 2. Table 2 relates to all of the church assets and the expenses that you will need to be reporting. If we go to the Ezra screen, you'll see I'm still on our Table 1 screen. To go to the Table 2, you'll see in the red banner bar the drop-down box to Table 2, Church Assets and Expenses. Now the first thing it's going to ask you is about saving Table 1, just in case. Just click OK to continue. It will pop up a little button that will say that you have successfully saved it, and it will take you to Table 2, as you see. Scrolling on down, let's start at the top. Lines 31 through 34 are really the assets and a little bit of the liabilities related to the church. You'll see we ask for the market value related to the church land, buildings, and equipment. We have separated that so that in line 31B, we show the church-owned parsonage separately from all of the other owned land and buildings. We did that just because we want to make sure who has parsonages and who doesn't. We know it's a very mixed bag out there, and we just like to have that information as part of our data that we have on each of our churches. Lots of people have asked the question, okay, how do we get that data? Do we have to do appraisals every year or every 5 years? You can if you'd like to, typically no more than 5 years apart. You don't have to do them every year, but for this, I think we're okay, and I would recommend two different areas that you could really look to determine this. One, if you have on your insurance policy replacement cost in that. Typically, the amounts that you show for coverage on your different buildings will be close to market value, because that's what it's going to take for you to rebuild that church or that parsonage or any other building. The second area that I would recommend is using the property tax values. Now, many of you may say, but we don't pay property taxes on our church buildings. This is true, but the county still has records of your property and still values it because they have to report what exempt properties they have. So if you look at your property tax information online, most all counties have it now online, then you can look at the market values that they're posting there. They've gotten much better in the last few years than where they ever have been in the past. So those are also good places to look. We'll move on from there to line 32. This is all of your other assets other than those buildings and those tangible assets. This relates more to your cash and investments, your vehicles, that sort of thing. And then we just ask if you could break out your cash and investment balances in line 32A before we move forward. In 33 and 34 is any debt that the church has, just so we keep an eye on how that's going. We know we talk about it when it first comes up with our district building and location committees, but we'd like to see how it's progressing. Make sure there's payments being happening and things like that. From there, let's move on down into the expenditure lines. The next lines, 35 through 46 and 7, are all numbers that are pretty much going to come from, except for two lines, pretty much come from the conference. These are all monies that you have submitted to us, either through apportionments, through special Sunday offerings, through special missional givings through the general advance specials or the conference specials. Also your benefits and health benefit payments and pension benefit payments that you have provided through those monthly invoices each year. We will, because of our systems here, we can upload that information into these lines, and you won't have to worry about these lines at all. Just please let us get it uploaded before you get everything else in there and actually hit the submit button. That way you can see everything at a glance and be able to review and reconcile it better. Now the two lines that we don't have anything on that you will have to fill in yourself are line 43 and 44, because those are amounts that are given to Methodist causes but not sent through the treasurer's office, or they're amounts that you've given to other missional opportunities that are not United Methodist opportunities. We're seeing this more and more often, and that's not a problem. It's still a mission of your church. But those are the two lines that you'll have to fill in yourself. As you can see looking at this screen, all but those two lines are coded in orange. That coding in orange makes them be those conference upload items and alerts you to that fact, so you don't have to worry about filling those in. But do check them once we get those uploads done. If we move on down from there, you'll see the rest of the expenses that you should have at your church. From the pastor's salary all the way down to principal and indebtedness and any capital improvement expenditures. Let's talk about a few of these lines as we go through this. The first one I'd like to speak to is line 49, and this is the total amount paid in compensation to associate pastors assigned by the bishop. Those are key words. GCFA always comes back with us with certain review questions, and this was one of the line items they had been focused on this year. Many people have associate pastors. Some of them you hire yourself outside of the appointment process. Some of them come through the appointment process. If they come through the appointment process, i.e. assigned by the bishop, include their compensation here. If they don't, if it's someone that you've hired yourself but you consider them associate pastor, perfectly fine, but let's include them in salary and benefits paid for all other church staff on line 55. The next line to discuss a little bit is line 50. And this is the amount paid for pastor or associates for housing and utilities or other related allowances. Typically, these are your housing payments, your housing allowance that you show on our clergy compensation form on line 2G or on line 4D, all related to housing for the pastor. Now, if you've got that number on line 2G, that means that line 1 compensation should be reduced by line 2G when you put it onto the statistical report on line 48. You don't want to duplicate those amounts. So make sure that if it's included together, you separate them. Housing in lieu on line 4D will actually show here. So anything related to housing goes on line 50. Anything else will go into line 48 for compensation. On line 50A, we've just asked you to separate whether the amount is for housing allowance, i.e. that line 4D, because no parsonage is provided, versus anything paid otherwise. So just do that breakout for us and that will help us immensely. The next line to speak to is line 57, and that's only because we've separated on line 57A a part of those operating expenses, asking for any related expenses that you've spent specifically on building operation and maintenance. This is one of those items that as we look to that trend analysis about how churches are going, one of the aspects we've started seeing is that people may not be keeping up with their buildings as much and performing proper maintenance and upkeep. So we want to keep an eye on who's declining in this area related to their buildings. So that's why the separation there. Also realize many of these lines are the ones that are going to be going into the calculations of your conference apportionments. That's all laid out on the front of this, as well as in our journal from annual conference in our CF&A report. So please be very careful in reviewing this section for numbers that you might have keyed in with an extra digit. I know we've had one pastor that all of a sudden was making $800,000. We knew that we have nobody that makes nearly that much money, by no means, and so that obviously had to be keyed in error. We go back to the churches as we spot this and ask you to review those numbers, but just in case, review them before we get them. The last item I want to note on this, and we've had many questions over the years, and that's line 60. As many of you know, line 60 is the grand total of all of these expenses, and it's the number you should be utilizing to reconcile back to your own church records for the end of the year. Line 60 never did an auto sum. It never calculated for you. That's because when GCFA built this program, and to this day still continues this, that line doesn't calculate until we at the conference office, through the administration of the program, tells it to calculate all of those together. So for your ease of use, we added in line 60A last year, which will do that calculation for you so that you can see the sum that will show up on line 60. As you can see here, the two lines do match up for my church in 2014. Yours will do the same once we see that. But that way, whenever you print your report before you submit it and before we push that button, you'll see what your total should be so that you can do that reconciliation as we move forward. That should be it for most of the question lines that we have on Table 2. But again, if there's another line that we haven't given you enough information on through this video, please email or contact myself or my office and we can provide you more information on any line that you need. Thanks for listening. Table 3 is next.